By the end, you'll know what happened below deck when a hurricane took a Golden Age ship, and why the survivors, back in blood-soaked ports, swore an oath never to speak of it again. Imagine 72 hours of pitch black, no horizon, no sky, only the scream of hurricane wind through oak timber, the roar of water breaking against a hull 3 inches thick, and grown men praying in forgotten tongues. This is what sailors of the Golden Age of piracy actually endured, sealed inside a wooden box below deck. The size of a modern city bus, tilted at 45 degrees, in seas that could break a warship. And they did not simply pray. What they did to survive was scrapped from every pirate film ever. The truth below deck was darker than any storm above, and the crews knew it in their bones. To understand those hours, step back to the world that built these ships and the men aboard. The Golden Age of piracy ran from 1650 to 1730, its main theater the Atlantic corridor, between West Africa, the Caribbean, and the American colonies, a vast corridor swollen with imperial wealth and blood. Sugar, silver, rum, indigo, enslaved human beings, and Spanish gold all moved along its restless, deadly currents. And under the black flag, freebooters, buccaneers, and privateers moved with them, taking what empires had already stolen. But the corridor had a secret. Between June and November, the Caribbean became a merciless hurricane belt. Warm water fed cyclones the size of small nations, hungry storms that dwarfed anything the sailors imagined. Winds of 150 miles per hour swept up walls of water 40 feet high. Into this belt sailed wooden ships crewed by men who had no radar, no radio, no proper barometer. They read the sky, the swell, the ache in old wounds and older bones for the coming warning. And when the reading came too late, they had one option left: descend, nail the hatches shut, endure. The blood-soaked ports these ships called home, Port Royal, Nassau, Tortuga, were built on this ruthless gamble. Every chest of pieces of eight reaching those wharves had first survived the sea, and that sea was ruthless. The real battlefield was never on deck. Here is the paradox that shaped every hurricane of the Golden Age. On deck, a man could be swept overboard in a heartbeat, crushed by a falling spar or snapping line, drowned in a green wave over the rail, so the captain ordered him below. Below was shelter, and below was where most of them died. Because below deck, in a hurricane, the hatches were nailed shut, sealed with pitch and tarpaulin so the boarding seas could not pour through and sink the ship from within. The crew was sealed inside its own coffin. Air came only through cracks, light from rationed lanterns. The very timbers meant to protect them became the walls of a drowning chamber below the waterline. The myth from Hollywood shows disciplined sailors, a stern captain at the wheel, ordered chaos, a shared song. The documented reality was different. It was chaos without discipline. It was command that broke within hours. Men who had signed Articles of Brotherhood turned on each other with pistols and knives inside the locked hold. The only law was the strongest lung and the steadiest hand. To understand it, we must descend one ladder. A Golden Age vessel was a layered thing. On top, the weather deck, exposed to sky and sea. Below it, the gun deck, where cannons lived in wooden carriages, lashed tight with heavy hemp rope.
Beneath the gun deck lay the orlop, a low crawl space for storage, hammocks, and huddled men. Below the orlop lay the bilge, the ship's lowest belly, where cold seawater always seeped and pooled. Deeper still, sealed behind copper and iron lock, waited the powder magazine, its barrels of black gunpowder. One stray spark reaching those barrels could turn the entire vessel into splinters, fire, and burning bone. In fair weather, this was a working world, but in a full hurricane, it became something else entirely. Hammocks that normally swayed a gentle foot began swinging through arcs of 6, slamming men into beams. Every candle was forbidden, every open flame a certain death sentence, because ships rolled and hot oil spilled. Only shielded lanterns burned below, rationed by the quartermaster, one small flame for every dozen souls aboard. The livestock, kept for fresh meat on long voyages, tore free of their splintered pens below deck.
Pigs, goats, and chickens slid across the pitching decks, biting and shrieking, colliding with the staggering men. The sound was not the tidy creak of a wooden ship, as remembered in some quiet period film. It was the groan of 100-year-old oak bending past its limit. A noise like breaking bones, magnified and continuous. The smell was tar, vomit, seawater, old sweat, gunpowder, and the sharp copper tang of fresh blood. Men wept. Men sold themselves. Men clutched rosaries or teeth or the trembling hand of a stranger. And then, without any warning at all, the first great wave broke straight through the hatch above. The myth says the crew held together. The record says the crew shattered. Command collapsed within hours aboard. Ship's logs, when they survived, and survivor testimony before Admiralty courts, tell the same grim story again. The captain, sealed away in his stern cabin, could not be heard over the roar of the hurricane. His officers could not move through flooded companionways to relay orders, and the men below felt abandoned. This is where the quartermaster earned his place in pirate articles under the black flag of piracy. On a merchant ship, discipline came from rank and lash. On a pirate vessel, from the quartermaster. Elected by the crew, armed with a loaded pistol, he alone kept order when hurricane winds struck. Court testimony describes quartermasters drawing those loaded pistols, not against enemy boarders, but against their own panicked shipmates. Men who tried to break for the sealed hatch, choosing drowning above over slow suffocation below deck. Men who tried to rush the powder magazine, meaning to end the terror with a single spark. When the water rose faster than pumps could shift it, the quartermaster made another ruthless decision aboard. On slaving ships, on prize ships, on any vessel carrying prisoners in chains, those prisoners were freed. Not from mercy, from arithmetic. A pump handle needs a living body to pull it steadily below. A body chained to a wall pumps nothing. So the iron chains were struck off below deck. Captives were driven to pump stations with the same pistol that had held them there an hour before. Pump or drown. Those were the terms aboard. Fortune favored the ruthless, not the brave that night. And what happened next was not written in any logbook. The truth still lies beneath the swell. Pump crews on a hurricane-caught ship worked in shifts, and the shifts grew longer as the storm grew worse. In the worst documented cases, men were chained to the pump handles for 40 hours without relief. Not as prisoners. Chained so, when they collapsed from exhaustion, their bodies would not slide across the deck. They pumped until their pants opened to the bone. Pumped with broken ribs from being thrown against the pumps. They pumped in 3 feet of icy bilge water that rose to their thighs and would not stop. While they pumped, the ship's surgeon worked in the orlop below, outmatched by every wound the storm brought him. A surgeon was often a barber, sometimes a butcher, occasionally a trained man from a European university. In a hurricane, his patients were the crushed and shattered, broken legs, skulls opened by cargo, hands lost. When a limb had gone black or bone come through skin, he amputated by lantern light alone. The seas rolled his table through arcs a saw could not follow, without anesthetic beyond a cup of rum. He tied off the artery with leather thong, cauterized the stump with heated iron, moved to the next. The screams were not heard on deck. On deck, there was only wind and the roar of storm.
Meanwhile, in the gun deck, the greatest single killer waited. The cannon, iron beast in wooden carriage. A long 9-pounder weighed close to a ton. A 24-pounder weighed 2.5 tons. Each rested in a wooden carriage lashed to the hull with heavy rope the sailors called breeching. In a hurricane, those ropes chafed and snapped, and the cannon broke loose upon a rolling sea. It became a battering ram of iron, thrown by the storm from side to side with every wave. Men in its path had no chance. Ribs collapsed, skulls burst, bodies pinned against the inner hull. The other men, in the dark, heard the cannon coming and did not know from which direction. They heard it strike. They heard the wet sound after. Then they heard it going the other way. Below in the bilge, the water rose, and with the water rose the rats. A ship carried hundreds. In fair weather they kept to the lowest, darkest holds. In hurricane, driven by the rising flood, they climbed. They climbed the timbers, they climbed the cargo, and they climbed the men in swarming, biting waves. Survivors described rats in their hair, rats in their clothes, rats biting through the leather of their boots. In the dark, the difference between a rat and a rushing hand could not always be told. And then came the last choice. If the ship was rolling too far, if the masts had caught wind and become a lever tipping the whole vessel toward capsize, there was one option left. Cut the masts. Send men on deck with axes into the very hurricane the hatches were nailed against to hack the masts. It was a decision that stripped the vessel of its ability to sail, to earn, to fight. It was made when the alternative was to be rolled over completely and drown with the keel skyward. One ship's final hours proved every horror at once. On the 26th of April, 1717, off Cape Cod, a nor'easter of near hurricane strength bore down on a single vessel.
Her name was the Ouida Galli, doomed. She was a former slaving ship taken as prize and captained by Samuel Bellamy, called Black Sam. At that moment, the richest pirate afloat, he had taken more than 50 ships in a single year. His holds carried, by later reckoning, more than 4.5 tons of silver, gold, and jewels. Aboard were 146 souls, Bellamy's own crew, captured merchant prisoners, and boys pressed into service. The wind rose through the afternoon. By nightfall, it was blowing at hurricane force onto a lee shore. Mountainous seas drove the Ouida backward, stern first, onto a sandbar less than 500 feet from the beach.
What followed took perhaps 15 minutes. Seas striking the grounded hull broadside broke her spine and toppled the mainmast. The gun deck flooded, the magazine breached. 4.5 tons of treasure sank in wadable water. Of 146 aboard, only 2 survived, carpenter Thomas Davis and Indian pilot John Julian. Both stood near the upper deck when she struck. Every man, sealed below the hatches, drowned in darkness. Their testimony before Massachusetts authorities revealed something worse than drowning: the last hour before the ship's final strike. Davis described the crew below already flooded to the waist, fighting for position on ladders beneath sealed hatches. From within the hull came one continuous scream, not the wind, but 140 men drowning together. Days later, bodies washed ashore, faces set not in peace, but in the final effort of the drowning. Men who had stopped trying to breathe and started trying to bite through wood beneath the hurricane's black shroud. The Ouida sank with her secrets, but her articles endured. Here, the meaning of every hurricane starts to show. Pirate articles, the written codes each crew signed before sailing, evolved in direct response to the storm. Extra shares of loot were written in for pump duty and for climbing the mast in foul weather. extra shares for the carpenter who plugged a shot hole below the waterline as the pumps roared above him. Compensation in gold and silver for the loss of a hand, an eye, a leg, the price of survival. The highest payments reserved for injuries taken during storm work, when death and dismemberment came fastest to men. Why did captains sail into the hurricane belt at all, knowing what the season did to their ships? The answer lies in economic desperation and economic opportunity, drawn together in the same ruthless breath aboard. The richest prizes moved in the hurricane season when honest captains stayed safely at anchor in port. The trade winds were reliable and the Spanish silver fleets, though wary, still ran their treasure-laden routes. A pirate who survived one hurricane could take 3 ships that no rival dared pursue in that season. And so they sailed, and so they gambled, and so the black flag flew over waters that killed hundreds. The myth of the free sea, of the lawless brotherhood, of the pirate republic of Nassau is half true. The other half, survival below deck, required lawless hierarchy, the quartermaster with his pistol standing silent guard, the pump chain that would not release, the captain sealed in his cabin while the crew tore itself apart. Freedom on the surface was bought with tyranny in the hold. That hierarchy outlived every ship it doomed. Hollywood has never shown you this. In films, the storm at sea is a rain-soaked deck, a rousing score. The camera never goes below.
It never shows the sealed hatch, the lantern swinging over an amputation, the rats. To show those things would be to betray a myth the industry has spent a century selling. The pirate as rogue, as gentleman, as swashbuckler, not as drowning animal sealed in a wooden box. But honest literature has told the truth for 200 years, if only we cared to read it. Melville, who sailed in whaling ships and knew below deck as a man knows his own kitchen, wrote plainly, of oak groaning, of water always rising, of men aboard reduced to something far less than men themselves. Coleridge, in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, wrote of a storm that drove one ship helpless south, of sailors who died on deck in silence, of terror not of the sea, but what it did.
These were not romances, these were reports. Modern marine archaeology has confirmed every dreadful line of them. When the wreck of the Ouida was found in 1984 off Cape Cod, divers brought up more than silver. They brought up pump handles worn concave by human hands, leg irons still fastened to shattered timber. They brought up the ship's bell, and beside it the skeletal remains of a boy of 11 years. One of the pressed hands still fastened inside a leather shoe. The pump handles alone tell a story. They tell of hours of work, of the grip of dying men, of a crew that pumped till drowning. They pumped until the sea took the ship out from under them, under the black flag, forgotten. Other wrecks tell the same tale. Queen Anne's Revenge, Blackbeard's flagship, lost in 1718 off North Carolina. The Fiery Dragon, lost off Madagascar in 1721. Spanish galleons lost by the dozen in one great hurricane.
1715 off Florida killed 1,000 sailors in a single night, littering 100 miles of beach. Silver coins from that wreck, treasure hunters still find today. Each wreck a wooden coffin, sealed and swallowed. Each hold a chamber that filled and would not open. Each crew a story the sea kept quietly. Archaeologists slowly, patiently returned these stories to us, and still, knowing all of it, the black flag flew. Knowing the storms, the drowning, the pumps and pistols and rats, men signed the articles and set sail. Because the alternative was the naval press gang, or the plantation, or the London slum, or debtor's prison. Because a share of a Spanish prize, taken and survived, could buy a life ashore no other work would. Because the sea, brutal as it was, remained a chance. And chance, in that century, was rare gold. One captain's fate closes the ledger of the storm. His name was Edward England, Black Flag pirate. He sailed under the black flag out of the Indian Ocean. In 1720, he took the Cassandra. The East Indiaman fell in a battle that cost him half his crew. Then came a 6-day monsoon. His ship, the Fancy, came through with her masts standing, but her men broken, hollow, and half dead. England was accused by his own crew of showing mercy to the Cassandra's captain, a fatal softness. For this mercy, they marooned him on Mauritius, alone with wreckage, salt, and the endless equatorial sun. He built a small boat from wreckage, crossed to Madagascar, and died penniless of tropical fever within the year. He had survived the hurricane. He had not survived his own crew. That was the pattern and the price. The sea did not care for reputations. The storm did not read articles. Men who returned to Port Royal knew. They came home with silver in their pockets, salt in their hair, knowing what they had done in darkness. They knew whom they had struck. They knew whom they had chained. They knew whom they left below. They swore in tavern light never to speak. Some kept the oath. Others drank until the oath drowned them. If you want to know how the captain who hunted the hurricane met his end, the next video awaits. The man who sailed into hurricane waters not to survive but to hunt within already waits on the channel. Join the crew and set sail with us.